This week on Quadriga, refugees welcome in Germany. Huge numbers of refugees are making their way to Germany. Hundreds of thousands are expected to arrive this year alone, more than ever before. They're fleeing from war and terror and persecution in Africa and the Middle East, from poverty and bleak economic prospects in Asia and Southeast Europe. Most Germans still express support and solidarity for taking in refugees. But there's also a heated policy discussion about whether Germany is reaching its limits. More deportations or more residency permits? Refugees, how welcome are they really in Germany? Coming to you from Berlin, Quadriga, the international debate. Your host this week, Melinda Crane.
Hello and welcome. Germany has already taken in more refugees than any other European country. But is its hospitality running out? That's what we want to talk about today with three people who have been following the story very closely. It's a pleasure to welcome Christian Jakob. He's an editor of the German newspaper Taz and co-author of a book on European migration politics whose English title would read Europe Sealed Tight. He says the next weeks will show whether Germany learned from the anti-immigrant pogroms of the early 90s. And we're pleased to have Alan Posener back on the show. He's an author and political commentator for the Berlin daily Die Welt. He says people who seek political asylum for legitimate reasons should get it. People who seek to exploit the asylum system for personal gain should get out. And finally, it's a pleasure to have on the show Marvin Oppong. He writes for a variety of German media. He has also published a book on German policy toward migrants. And he says the German government does not adequately protect asylum seekers, and it's not strong enough on racism. So a warm welcome to all three of you. Alan Posener, official estimates of the number of people applying for asylum this year go as high as 500,000 people. For a country with just 80 million population, that is a pretty large number. Don't you think perhaps, in fact, Germany is finally reaching its limits?
Well, you know, a large number, that's relative. I could say that for 80 million, 500,000 isn't really all that much. There is a problem, and this isn't an objective thing. You can talk about numbers. Is it too much or too little? It's how people feel it, and there's obviously a beginning groundswell on the right of people who say enough is enough, and I think you have to do something about it because we do want to keep Germany open, A, for migration, and B, for legitimate refugees, which is why out of these 500,000, about 45% are not legitimate asylum seekers. We have to send them back as quickly as possible to concentrate on those whom we really want to help, have to help, because it's in our constitution.
Christian Jakob, even if Germany is physically and economically capable of taking in perhaps even more refugees, isn't there a political limit, and wouldn't over-ambitious hospitality perhaps actually spur a backlash? You yourself mentioned the anti-immigration pogroms of the 1990s. Do you think that a repeat is in store?
There is no such thing as an objective limit, I would say. It is true that the rising number raises also the possibility for anti-immigrant pogroms and violence. But I would say that at the same time, it has a lot to do with the conditions under which refugees and asylum seekers are being welcomed in Germany. And a big problem is that the cities who have the responsibility to host the refugees do not get sufficient support from the federal government. And that's a big problem that leads to conditions which are very poor in terms of housing and in terms of the social welfare system. And as long as the federal government doesn't fulfill its obligation to support sufficiently the cities and communes in Germany, the probability that there will be more anti-immigrant demonstrations is likely to rise.
I want to come back in a moment to the burdens on the cities, but tell me, Marvin Oppong, your own opening statement mentioned racism and said the German government hasn't been strong enough against it. But how widespread is racism really? If I look at the unbelievable plethora of grassroots initiatives to help refugees, as well as the opinion polls, I'd have to conclude that it's actually a very, very small minority that are anti-immigration and perhaps racist.
Of course, it's a minority of people who are racist, but racism is quite widespread in Germany. I experience that myself every week as an Afro-German citizen. Thing is, even the United Nations, the Human Rights Committee criticized Germany and said Germany is not doing enough about discrimination. I think there are some problems, and German politics haven't done much to solve these problems.
And would you say it's racism that is driving the anti-immigration sentiment and some of the incidents that we've been seeing recently, or is it perhaps a feeling that that people have that they're being taken advantage of?
Yeah, I think it's different things. I think there is racism, but of course there are also people who don't have work themselves, and then migrants come, and then they think the migrants are taking work away. So I think it's both.
Apparently, according to one opinion poll, 76% of those surveyed said that they would have no problem with refugee housing right in their own neighborhoods. But will they really feel that way if the predictions of record numbers do prove true?
German authorities are expecting a huge spike in asylum applications this year. It could set a new record in the Federal Republic's history. Municipalities are sounding the alarm. Housing options are running out. More and more tent cities and container communities are being built to accommodate the wave of humanity. And right-wing groups are growing more violent. In the last several months, the number of firebombing attacks on planned housing facilities for refugees rose sharply. Refugees themselves and those who help them are also being attacked. The majority of Germans are in favor of offering refugees a home in their country. But could that sentiment soon change?
Alan Posener, at the beginning of this week, the state of Baden-Württemberg held a so-called migration summit to talk about how to relieve the burden on local refugee processing centers, which truly are swamped with work. But it's a little confusing if you listen to the debate among local officials. Some say they are completely overburdened, completely overextended, they can't handle more. And others, including the Council of Cities, say, hey, we've got the capacity. Who's right here?
Well, I suppose everyone's right from their point of view. You know, I mean, it's a question of where these refugees or non-refugees are, you know, happen to be. I mean, in certain places, like in East Germany, there's a lot of that people are actually downscaling cities because the population is shrinking. And other places, like in Munich and parts of Berlin, which are expanding, there isn't much room. I mean, you know, but that's a technical question, isn't it? The main thing isn't a technical question. The main thing is with this anti-immigrant sentiment is that there are certain people out there, you know, disseminating right-wing ideas, and you're not going to solve that with more money or with shifting responsibility here or there. You have to attack, or you have to engage with these right-wing ideas, with the idea that someone who comes to you because they've got a different colour or a different religion or whatever, that, you know, that they somehow don't belong. That has to be done. It's also, by the way, not just a problem of the government. Government can't do that. Civil society has to do that.
But there's a very active civil society out there, isn't there, Christian? Jakob, I mentioned to Marvin Oppong this very widespread effort to help refugees at the grassroots level. If you go on the websites for a city like Berlin, you'll find literally dozens of initiatives, from language initiatives to housing initiatives, lots of different ways that German citizens are trying to help out. Would you agree with Alan that it's not a question of resources, it's not a question of local administration, but it's really simply a question of attitudes?
No, I wouldn't say it is so easy. It is true that there is a remarkably large amount of initiatives who are trying to support refugees, who are trying to actually do something like a civil society welcome culture for refugees. This has not been the case for many years. This is something relatively new. And it's also surprising that this amount of willingness to help is stable in years when the number of refugees is growing and growing. And at the same time, I would say that as long as the government and the administration is not taking sufficiently responsibility for the number of refugees that are coming, it's going to be harder and harder for civil society initiatives to actually fight xenophobia attitudes and xenophobia movements. It is not the case that xenophobia is always there and it's always the same. There is a certain dynamic which has to do with the protests against new refugee housing projects. Right-wing parties and right-wing movements have been trying to get together with conservative citizens who were not so happy with that, but at the same time they were like merging with radical right-wing groups, and that's a very problematic development, and it's not so easy to solve that one can say, okay, we have so much civil society engagement, they will get along with it.
One of those movements, of course, Marvin Oppong, was the Pegida movement that was so often in the headlines this spring, a movement against the Islamization of Germany, as they called it. That movement was based in Dresden. Of course, it did have some demonstrations in other cities as well, but massive support in Dresden, in the former communist East. Some of the incidents that we've seen this past week of rising violence also occurring in the former communist East. Why is that?
That's a good question. If you ask me, I think one of the reasons is the economy. The economy is quite weak in the eastern part of Germany. Many people don't have work, but there are also some scientists saying there is more racism where people are not used to foreigners. And this is the case in the eastern part of Germany. I think that could also be a reason, because it's something different if you grew up with foreigners, with migrants, if you get in contact with them, yeah, or if you have cliches in your head, or if you really know how they are. I think that might be a reason.
Alan Posener, you said it's not a question of resources from the federal government as opposed to the state governments. But what about an affirmative, real attempt to win hearts and minds? Is that missing here from the federal German government?
Well, yes, it is, but take any case you want. Take the question of Europe, take the question of, well, I don't know. This government of Angela Merkel is not a government that goes out to win hearts and minds in any respect. So it's stupid. It's a waste of breath to demand it from them. What we, however, need to... I'm saying it's not a question of resources because we actually have enough resources to deal with the legitimate amount of asylum seekers who come to Germany. And out of the 450,000 who are going to be coming this year, only about half of them have any hope of getting into this country legitimately as asylum seekers. And the others are from the Western Balkan countries where they have no hope of getting asylum. So what we need to do is to concentrate the resources we have on those who need it. And that's not happening. So you know, let's not call, you know, if Mrs. Merkel, she's not going to deliver a blood, sweat and tears speech. That's not Merkel. That's not the way she does things. So let's not demand it.
Christian Jakob, there's a long-running trial right now in Germany against a young woman who was part of a group that for 10 years murdered people of migration background with impunity. It was often said as the trial began that German authorities had proved blind in the right eye, meaning blind to violence, to extremism, to terrorism from the right as opposed to the left. Would you say that is still true?
Yes, that's true. I would say that compared to the 1990s, there has been a significant change in the attitude towards anti-immigrant violence and anti-immigrant attacks. Particularly the government, but also part of civil society has been addressing this problem much more directly and willingly. When in the 1990s, radical right-wing extremists burned houses of asylum seekers and immigrants, the ex-Chancellor Kohl refused to go there and said he didn't want to visit in order to show his condolence to the survivors. This has changed a lot, particularly in terms of how civil society dealt with the NSU. But at the same time, police
NSU was that particular group that she was a member of.
Yeah, but at the same time, the police and the justice system is still not doing too well in order to fight anti-immigrant violence and crime.
Marvin Oppong, Just this past week, an arson attack on a refugee shelter, the bombing of a left-leaning pro-asylum politician's car exploded in a bomb. Isn't that actually terrorism? Isn't that homegrown terrorism? And do we need to see the federal government, the Interior Minister, perhaps call it by name?
I wouldn't like to speculate about an act which hasn't been analyzed by the security authorities until the end. It's a matter of definition. Yeah. What is terrorism? If terrorism is to use force to frighten or motivate someone to do something specific, then I think it is possible to call this terrorism.
But that's maybe also part of the problem, that the government is has been refusing for so long time to call it as terrorism. That also shows that they haven't given sufficient attention to the problem.
Alan Posener, there's a lot of populism out there right now, including by leading German press organs. Some of the yellow press or some of the boulevard press. Are they stoking this purposefully?
You're referring, I think, to Bild Zeitung, which belongs to the publishing house that I work for. So you hardly expect me to say that you're right here. Actually, you know, the yellow press, it goes the way people go. I mean, you know, you can have... we've seen this with the question of Islam in Germany. When our former president, Mr. Wolf, said Islam belongs to Germany, the Bild Zeitung said, well, why are you kowtowing to Islam, Mr. Wolf? But now, you know, they've accepted it and they go along with it. So I don't think this is not a problem of the mainstream press. This is a problem of certain very well-known, very clearly defined right-wing people and right-wing parties, like, for instance, the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, and so on, and certain organs which indeed belong to the conservative part of the middle class and the you know, upper middle class, but they're not actually... You know, they're not the usual suspects, which is always us, is always Springer. And these are people we need to engage.
Some would say that it's conservative politicians like Bavarian State Premier Horst Seehofer who are also pandering and also responsible for inciting anti-immigrant sentiment. Let's take a look.
Bavarian State Premier Horst Seehofer likes to provoke, and he isn't afraid of making a scene. Recently, he fulminated against what he called the massive abuse of asylum laws and demanded rigorous countermeasures. Among other plans, he wants to set up 2 central reception centers on the Austrian border for refugees who have little chance of being granted asylum. Mostly refugees from the Balkan countries. They make up around 40% of all asylum seekers. At a recent event, Seehofer's Christian Social Union Party also discussed lowering housing standards for refugees. And instead of cash, they'd only give food vouchers. CSU party dignitaries would also like to streamline the deportation process. So, is deterrence the right response to the flood of refugees?
Christian Jakob, mass camps with rudimentary standards for the purpose of deportation, isn't that a very problematic concept for a country that always is very, very careful and sensitive about anything that smacks of its fascist past?
What we are currently observing is the establishment of a 2-class asylum law, particularly to avoid the influx of Roma from southeastern Europe. The federal government has risen the idea in May. Bavaria is the first federal state to come up with fulfilling this concept. What they're currently doing is they are building up refugee camps for European asylum seekers, which are in most of the cases Roma. And indeed, that's a very problematic concept if you think of the German history, when Germany did keep Roma in camps in the period of the National Socialism. And in my opinion, there is absolutely no need for such a 2-class asylum law or asylum concept. The majority of the immigrants from Southern Europe who did apply for asylum in the last years have always been rejected on the basis of the existing laws. So even if you would try to reduce the number of them, there is no need to set up this superficially hard new law in order to deter them from coming.
But I have to contradict you here. It's simply not true that out of the over 200,000 people from the Western Balkans, the majority, or even a large minority, are Roma. For instance, from Kosovo, there's hardly any Roma in Kosovo, and they're not coming there. From Montenegro, from Macedonia, we know very well that these people are not Roma. And to sort of imply somehow that a camp for people who are coming here illegally is in any way comparable to the camps the Nazis set up, that is just under the I'm not going to even discuss that. We're talking about a country which has learned from its past and which is trying to deal with a very difficult situation.
Roma organizations do see this parallel. They are very...
Well, of course they would, wouldn't they?
And I would say that they are right to do so. Yeah. And at the same time, there is not even a necessity to do this. I don't see why Roma and every other asylum seeker can't be treated in an equal way.
But the fact is, Marvin Oppong, if we look at it, it's no wonder that Roma and non-Roma are trying to stretch the concept of asylum, because the fact is there is almost no other legal way to enter this country. Isn't what's really needed a completely new system of immigration, an immigration law that would grant the right to enter to people who are coming here for economic purposes?
Yeah, I think we need changes in the law, because the current law is not more sufficient to handle the current problems. And there are too many different ways to come to Germany. I think this needs to be set up in a new system, because it's also a matter of fairness between asylum seekers. Because when it becomes easy for one asylum seeker to come, who is just coming here to work, and another asylum seeker who is really facing hard problems in this country, he cannot come, then it's a matter of fairness too.
Isn't the system broken, Alan Posener? We've discussed in Germany, I think, 15, 20 years now, whether Germany needs an immigration law. The fact is, this is a rapidly aging country. It's going to have desperate shortages of young working people who can pay for its very luxurious social welfare system. Germany needs migrants. Why are we talking about deporting them?
Well, firstly, yes, Germany needs migrants. We're talking about deporting people who are coming to Germany the wrong way, who are trying to, play the system, and we're talking about deporting them
because... But they're playing the system because the system is broken.
You're right, and we need an immigration law. We need a way for people, not just Roma, by the way, anyone from the Western Balkans, and not only from there, from China, from India, from wherever, who can come, who wants to work, who wants to realize their German dream in Germany. We need that kind of law. So I totally agree. That's the way forward, definitely. But while we're debating what's in that law, we still have to enforce the law as is. And the asylum law says you can come here if you have a legitimate reason. And half of those who are coming do not have a legitimate reason.
Let me come back to the title of our program. It was called Refugees Welcome in Germany, with a question mark. I'd like to add refugees and migrants, Christian Jakob, and ask you, do you think we will see a new immigration law finally adopted in Germany? The Conservatives are finally saying they're willing to talk about it. Will we see that welcome culture extended to migrants who come for economic reasons?
Definitely. I would say that welcome culture cannot be reduced to an immigration law, but for many, many years, particularly the Conservative Party has refused to accept the necessity for such an immigration law. The industry and the economic associations have been pressuring them very hard, and now they are finally seeming to accept, not all of them, but a growing number of Conservative politicians are saying, yes, we probably will have to have such a law, and the sooner this law comes into regulation, the better.
What do you think? Do you think we've seen a real change in mindset?
I think so. I think we don't need just new laws. I think what we need is a concept, also a concept to integrate people who come here. Because Germany in the past made a mistake in the 1960s, 70s. The so-called Gastarbeiter came to Germany.
Guest workers.
Guest workers, yeah. And everyone thought one day they will go back, but they stayed here. So now this is the same situation. these people, they need work, they need education, and I think it must be a all-over concept.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for being with us today, and thanks to all of you out there for tuning in. See you soon.